This is Gemara Metziah Daf Nun Vav, and today's shiur has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, L'zecher Nishmas, his father, whose yard site is on the day of this Daf, the second day of Yontif, and therefore the learning should be as chos for Eilizer Moshe ben Shema, B'siyata D'Shmaya, Torah, the Torah of Pesach, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, should elevate Rav Eilizer Moshe ben Shema to a higher place in Gan Eden Shalmaila, closer to the Kisei HaKavod, and ultimately be a Melitz Yesher for his entire family. So holding on the bottom of Nunheim and Beis, we pulled up about 12 lines from the bottom. The first word of the line is a mamzer. And we're in the middle of discussing the Shita of Rameir, which is Asu Chachamim Chizik L'Divreihem Kishel Torah. That Chazal sometimes will make their halachos as stringent as dinei de'oraisa. And we just proved this from a din in Gittin, in which we saw that Rameir held Yetzev Avlan Mamzer. And the obvious question is, how can it be Avlan Mamzer if the whole din of Avani Nechtam is a din derabanan? And the answer to that question is also Chizik L'Divreihem Kishel Torah. So Masiv Rav Sheishes, 12 lines to the bottom of Nehemiah and Beis. The first word of the line is Mamzer. Asks Rav Sheishes, Mechalin oisai kesef al kesef necheshes. You could be mechalel those coins, the coins of Meiser Sheni, al kesef necheshes, upon copper coins. Al necheshes, you could, excuse me. B'chalin oisei kesef al kesef. I don't know how I just read that. Necheshes al necheshes. Kesef al necheshes. Unecheshes al peiros. You could transfer the sanctity in all of these moves. And v'yachsav yiftes al peiros. And in the last case, when you do necheshes al peiros, then you have to redeem those fruits with money and bring the money to Yerushalayim. Divri Rabbi Meir. Chachamim oimrim yalu peiros v'yoichle b'Yerushalayim. Then in that last case, the peiros have the kedusha and they bring them up to Yerushalayim. So in contrast, says Rav Sheishes, that's the halacha that we find by Meiser Sheni of Demai. Continues the Gemara, and again, if you were paying attention, there were a whole slew of kulais being machalal back and forth, etc. Continues Rav Sheishes to be machalin kezel necheshes. Is that possible? Vatanan, 4 lines to the bottom, but we learned Sela shal Meiser Sheni v'shel chulin shenis arvu. They got mixed up, and therefore we don't know which one is Meiser Sheni. Maybe b'sela mois. What do you have to do? You have to bring a sela's worth of ma'is of necheshes v'aymer kol makom sheyeshna sela shal meiser sheni mechulalas al ma'is halalu. And then what does he do? Ubayra as a yafish alahem. He takes the better of the 2 coins, umachala alaha, and he deconsecrates it upon it. So what do we see? Mimnei, why do we have to do this in this case where the items got confused and we don't know which one is Meiser Sheni? Says the Gemara as we turn over to Nunvavam and Aleph, and they say, the reason why you have to pull off this convoluted chalal process, al necheshes. You're allowed to transfer silver coins that have regular kedushas Meiser Sheni upon necheshes midaychek in a time of needs. Lo sheyekayim kain, not so that it should remain on the necheshes, but rather so that you'll then take it and go one step further and transfer it onto the kesef. So what do we see? That when I have a silver coin, I transfer it to the necheshes, and then those necheshes go on back onto kesef. So says the Gemara, Katani Miyas, 3 lines down in Vavam and Aleph, what do we see? Mechalelin midaychek. The only time you're allowed to do this is in a pressing situation, midaychekin. Shloi midaychek loy. But yeah, what do we see in the previous Mishnah? The first Mishnah didn't say anything about Midoichek. When we were talking about Meiser Sheni of Demai, we allowed regular transfer back and forth. So what do we see? We see that when it came to the Din D'Rabbanan, we're more Mekel. Because the first case of Demai was a D'Rabbanan. In that case, we were more Mekel. The second case was not Demai, it was a Vadai. We're more Machmir. So I asked the Gemara what happened. You just told me that Rameir holds that the Rabbanans are bumped up to the level of Daraisas and also Chizik Devrayim. Shlomi Deichek Loi, Amar Rav Yosef. Afal Bisha Mekel Rameir B'Vidyanoi. You're right. Rameir is Mekel in the Pidyon of it. But Machmeru B'Achilasoi. But there are scenarios where there is higher level of stringencies for the Dirabanan, namely with regard to the Achila, the eating of the produce. Titanya, as we learned in our Braisa, Lo itir limkar demai. You're not allowed to sell demai without first taking off the appropriate Trumas HaMaisros, Ella Lisitoin Bilvad. Excuse me. Only a sita and a wholesaler is allowed to sell the demai without first taking off Meiser. Balabayis. But when it comes to a balabayis, Bengach Sarach La'aser, he has to take off Meiser, Divrei Rabbi Meir. Chachamim Aimrim, excuse me, Echad Sita and Vechad Balabayis, Moicher V'Shalech Lechaveiroi V'Noislam Matana. What do we see? We see that Rameir is indeed more machmer on the D'Rabbanan of Demai. True, not about the Pidyon. But yes, about the Achila of it. Masiv Ravina asks Ravina on this teretz of Rav Yosef. Again, Rav Yosef, that's telling us that even though Rameir is Mekel B'Pidyon, he's Machmer B'Achilasai. Masiv Ravina, first one line is Ravina, 12 lines down. Halikeach min anachtoim. Someone buys bread from a nachtain who's an Amaretz, a baker. Meiser min hachama ala tzoinenes, or min a tzoinenes ala chama. He's allowed to take off meiser from the hot breads to pater up cold breads, and from the cold breads to pater up the hot breads. Va'afilu mitvosim arbe. Divri Rameir, and even it comes from different shapes and molds. So ask the Gemara, that I can understand why. Kidrav Ilam, Rav Ilam, how do we know you're allowed to take off from the inferior products to superior products? Which is what's going on over here. The cold bread for the fresh hot bread. How do we know that works? Says Rabbi Loshen Amar, Loisesu alav chait. You should not be rasin barimchem as chel by mimenu. When you set aside the produce as truma im einai kadoish. So if the inferior stuff does not become actual truma, nesias chait lama. So Rav Willow learns the fact that the pasuk says "Sisu olav chait." Mikan, here is the Makar, that it works. If you take from inferior product to superior product, Lamaisa, the Truma and Maisa works, as we learn it out from the pasuk of Mimenu, and the pasuk begins, if it's going to be a chait, that means that it works. And here's the kasha. What did the Brisa say? Afilu made pusim harbe. From many different bands, asks the Gemara why. Ask the Gemara, why are we not concerned that one might end up coming from that which is chayiv on to that which is pater, and that which pater onto that which is chayiv? So from the fact, asks Ravina, that Rameir is not worried about this, what must the reason be? The reason must be because we're dealing with Demai. We're dealing with a Derabanan. So says Ravina, we see that when it comes to Derabanan, Rameir is indeed more mekel even with Achila. Amar Abaya, Says Abaya, smack in middle of the Amud. First one on line is Alachiyov. Rav Elazar Shaber Kasha Lei. Rav Elazar's kasha is a good kasha. Ushmuel Lo Shaber Kamishani Lei. But Shmuel did not answer him appropriately. Says the Gemara, what does this mean? De kasha Lei the Rav Elazar Misa Bidei Shemayim. Rav Elazar asked about Misa Bidei Shemayim. Now Misa Bidei Shemayim, as much as, of course, it's a form of Misa, but this is not as Chomer as a Misas Bezdin. So Rav Elazar was asking that the Rabbanon were more Machmir, and they added on an extra fifth when a Yisrael eats Shumas Meiser of Demai. So such a scenario, we see that they're Machmir like the Daraisa of eating Shumas Meiser. So says the Gemara, but even though we're Machmir, that there is Misa B'dei Shamayim, but it's not the most Chomer type of Misa. So the question is, asks Rav Elazar, what's the reason why we're Machmir on the Shumas Meiser of Demai, even though it's not getting the highest level of Misa? Umishani lei, and Shmuel answered back, Misas Bezdin. Shmuel answered back something involving Misas Bezdin. So basically asks Abaye, this is a classical situation of apples and oranges. Shmuel, you're not responding to the kasha of Rav Elazar. Why? Because Dilma Shiny Misas Bezdin the Chamiri. Maybe Misas Bezdin is more Chamer. Umoy says Rav Sheishes, excuse me, the Chamir. Rav Sheishes lo Yishabir Kamaisavla. And when Rav Sheishes asked on Shmuel was not a good question, why the Kamri inu Misa? Umoy Rav Sheishes alav. The Gemara is asking that if we were to go back the whole Amud Beis of yesterday and the beginning of today and start doing math, all the different scenarios, it doesn't add up. Rav Sheishes was asking from alav on a case of Misa. Well, the Ma'id Rav Sheishes, but that which Rav Sheishes did indeed ask, Rav Sheishes, Shaber Kameshanalei. So says Abaye, Elo Ravina. But what about this final step? Ravina, which was talking about buying the breads from the Nachtaim. Ravina, which allowed not only to be thing of troops and mices from the hot to the cold to the hot, but even from different defusim. Asks Abaye, Adamoisim minachtam, you're asking for the baker, l'saylim ibhalter. Why are you asking for the baker? Let's bring a raya from the palter, which over here Rashi says is talking about one who bakes bread in mass and distributes it. That what? The Mishnah teaches us that when you buy from this wholesale bread distributor, meiser min kol tefos, you have to take a meiser from each and every type. So what do we see? So we see there a mayor is indeed more machmir on demai. Elamai is the cholameimer. Rather, what are you going to have to answer me? Palter mitrei tlosa gavri zavin. You're going to have to answer me that a palter buys bread from 2 or 3 different people. Again, he's the middleman, he's the distributor. And therefore, it's not necessarily a chumrah to take a meiser from each and every one, because that's the din. Because they came from multiple peoples. Whereas the Nachtaim, we can explain, it came from a single person, and that's the reason why you have to take off the meisers. But it's not going to be a kula at all. Rather, it's different cases. Rav Amar Shmuel Shabbat Kamashana Le Shem Misa Ba'ilam. So Rav says, no, Shmuel's kasha was fine. There's a concept of a Shem Misa. It's true that it's a Misa B'dei Shamayim versus a Misa's Bezdin. But La Maisa, there's the Shem Misa, and therefore that's how you could ask the kasha. Says the Gemara, let's go back to our Kisugya Avaina on the bottom of Nunvav and Aleph. Elu Dvarim Shein Lemaina. The following entities is no problem. You can charge whatever you want. Avodim, slaves, taras, documents, karkois, land, hekdashis, ein lem tashlume kefal. As well, there's no din of kefal in these cases. Lo tashlume dalad vehei. Shaymer chinam einay nishba. Shaymer chinam does not swear, and Neisisachar does not pay in a mishalim. Rav Shimon Aimer says, Rav Shimon, as we turn over to Nanvavam Beis, Kodshim shu chayiv achriyusam. When it comes to kodshim, which one is obligated in their responsibility, yesh lamayna. She'ena chayiv achriyusam ein lamayna. Rav Yehuda Omer, Av amecher sefer Torah behema umar galiois. You sell sefer Torah, an animal or pearls? Ein lamayna. Amru lai amru ella es elu. Chum responded, only these items, only the items listed in the beginning of the Mishnah, you, Rav Yehuda, are going too far. You're listing Meicher Sefer Torah, Beimer Margalios. Say the Chachamim, no. Look at the beginning of the Mishnah, Avadim Shtaris Karkais. Those are the items that have no ona, but not that which you, Rav Yehuda, are saying. So, in classical Gemara sense, on Vav and Beis, we begin the Gemara, which begins with Mekairais, to the first part of the Mishnah, Avadim Shtaris Karkais, Ekteishais. There's no din of ona, the Tanur Rabban. Something that goes from hand to hand. Yatsu karkois excludes the land, she'enim metalta that are movable. Yatsu avadim shokshul karkois, and it excludes slaves which are comparable to land. Yatsu shtaros mimkar shegufa machar vegufa ikanu. Yatsu shtaros she'in gufa machar ve'in gufa ikanu. The star itself is not actually a kinyan ve'ina oimdim el raya, and it's only there as a raya. It el raya shabehem for a raya. Mikan amru. What do we see from here? Ha meicher sheiroisav levasam. Someone sells a star to a basam, to a spice dealer, and then the star is actually being utilized for the paper purposes to wrap up the spices. Then yesh lehem oina. Says the Gemara, Pshita, of course there's oina in that case, because it's a star, not for a star purpose. It's a star being utilized as a piece of paper. Says the Gemara, Lafuke mid Rav Kahana. It's exclusive from Rav Kahana, Dama'ina ina leprutais. There's no enough for prutais, Kamash V'la, and Yishna leprutais, even though the paper is only worth a few mere prutais, there still will be oina. Continues the Gemara, really going back to the Brisa Ramil of discussing Hekteishais. Where do we see his no enough? By Hektish Amar Kra, Echav, Echav lo Hektish. So Maskif la Rava. As Rava bar Mamel, Kolecha d'chsev yadai yadai ma'amishu. Wherever it says yadai, it means his actual hand. Elamayatov, that's true. D'chsev, the Paul says, V'yikach kol artzai miyadai. Hachanam t'kol arabi yadai unakila. Are you telling me that Sicha in Melech Mayiv took the whole land in his hands? It can't be. Elamer shusai. So rather, what are we going to have to say? That when the Paul says yad, it doesn't really mean yad. It means his possession. So maybe over here as well, it means his possession. So therefore, how do we have a makar to exclude karka from oina? Says the Gemara, but wait, is it not true that which we originally said? It doesn't actually mean a hand. How do we know that if the item that one stole is not only on his possession, but it's in his roof, his chutzner, his enclosure? So time the I would have thought yadei mamishu. So proves the Gemara the yad could yes mean hand mamish. Furthermore, we see in a brayse and also biyada. Ainly Eliyada, putting the get in her hand. These are all Gemaras that we've learned. Vinasa become makam. Time the God's Rahman of Vinasa and Allah Hachi have Amina Golech Yada Mamish. So it says the Gemara. So we see again that the word Yadai does indeed mean Yada Mamish. So we have a stira. Does Yan mean Rishos or does Yan mean hand? So it concludes the Gemara. Ella, 15 lines from the wide lines. First one line is Ella. Ella kol yada mamishu. V'shayni asam. In that case of Sichain Melech, Sichain was particularly different. Could only have meant Rishusai. But in our case, of course, it can mean Yadai. And therefore, we'll have a Makar, that Karka, there is no Hektish. Karka, there's no Oina. Bayi Rav Zera. And we conclude with Rav Zera's Shaitla. Schiros yesh lahem Oina. What is the status with schiros, renting an item? Is there oina? Mim karam rachmana avaloy schiros. Do we say it only talks about selling, not renting it? Oidam alay shana. Amrle abaya miksiv mimkar lo ilam. Mimkar stamaksiv. Does it say mimkar miksiv mimkar la'olam? No, it just says the word mimkar. V'hainami, and schiras as well is b'yoyme mechira. He is a form of mechira for that day, and therefore will yes be included in the dinam of oina. Ba'irava. Rava has a shayla. Chitin v'zeram bekarka ma'u. If you plant wheat into the ground, ish lamayna in lamayna. Do we say kamad desadim b'kada damyan? Do we say that the seeds are, if they would be in a container, yesh lem aina, because they're items, or tubatzanu al gavara, and therefore there's no aina, like because the fact it's karka. Says the Gemara, hechidami. If the case is that he said I put 6 of seed in the ground, and witnesses came here and said he only put 5 in the ground, if it's a measurable item, it could always go back. He said, I put seeds into the ground, and later they found out that they did it. So is there aina or not? We're going to stop over here. We'll pick up with the shayla in the next year. B'siyata dishmaya.